Welcome to Mercurial Outboard Motorbike. In case you're wondering what's going on here, that's a 140 horsepower Mercury 2.5 litre two-stroke outboard motor. Anyone with a soul, as we know, loves a two-stroke. I'm not aware of any 2.5 litre two-stroke V6 motorbikes around the place, so it falls upon me to build one. So the engine's going to come out of this outboard motor and we'll put it in a motorbike. Welcome folks, here we are in the shed with I guess that looks like an outboard motor hanging on a crane in my workshop, which is a bit of a strange thing to have in a shed full of racing cars and what have you. But strangely enough, you take the cover off, great big heavy cover. What you see when you look inside is a 2 litre, 2-stroke, 140 horsepower V6 motorbike engine. Bizarre really. So there it is, 3 down there, 3 down there, crankcase, 3 carburetors on the top, that's the alternator, starter motors around the other side. Just needs to be released from its current home and we'll find a new one for it. Here we have the engine on an engine stand with sufficient use of an oxy torch and levers and wedges and a hammer and various things. We managed to eventually extract it from the leg of the outboard that had been living on for 18 years and corroding onto the studs. But there it is. It's called a power head in the outboard world, which is a pretty cool name. So, V6 2-stroke, that's the coil pack, 6 coils. 2 of them fire at a time, which means it must have a 60-degree crank in there. But that's a bit ugly, we'll take that off. And this bit in the, so they're the 2 cylinders, 6 plugs. This bit in the middle is the exhaust port. These 2 exhaust ports come out there, and that's water cooled, which is a great idea on an outboard motor. It's not so handy on a motorbike because it puts more heat into the cooling system, which means you need a bigger radiator, but I think we'll be okay with that. And down the side of the motor, we've got all this ugly stuff. The starter solenoid is supposed to go there. That's the regulators for the alternator, which is built into the flywheel. We'll get to that in a minute. Starter motor, and very ugly and untidy. If you're on an outboard motor with a mailbox over the top of it, obviously it doesn't matter. If it's sitting there on a motorbike, it needs to be either tidied up or covered up. And you can see the exhaust ports there. Over on this side it's a bit tidier. Whoops. Same 3 spark plugs, or different 3 spark plugs. All that lives over here is this weirdo throttle linkage, which is moves the throttles and also changes the ignition timing as a function of throttle angle. And while we're there, I'll show you why this engine's not being used in a boat anymore. I think this thing here is a knock sensor, and if it is, it obviously doesn't work very well because underneath our little water-cooled cylinder head, see 2 nice pistons and one that's been detonated like mad and is now needing replacement, which is not such a big job, we can address that. So here's the front of the engine. You can see the V-angle quite there and the exhaust goes out the back. And under this cover there's a really nice little integrated system. It's got the ring gear for the starter motor, a bunch of coils and a bunch of magnets that whiz around. 3 of the coils fire the ignition system and the other ones are the alternator. So without any belts or ancillary systems, you've got ignition system, starter motor and alternator all built into there with just a bit of bolt-on electronics. Very nice. As you can see, I've turned the motor up the other way now. So this is the underside of the engine, if you like, if it wasn't, if it was in a car. In an outboard, obviously it stands vertically, so it doesn't matter. 3 lovely twin choke carburetors, which run into 6 reed valves in the crankcase, 1 for each cylinder, but it makes it quite tall from the crankshaft up, and begs the question of how to mount the whole thing in a motorbike. Now, the nice thing about being a 2-stroke, it doesn't have a gravity-dependent oil system, so you can mount the engine any way around you like. The crankshaft laterally in the bike, longitudinally in the bike, and the engine wherever you want it. So I'll explore a few of the options. Now, there's an option for putting it in the bike laterally, crossways, with the cylinders just slightly poking up, pointing forward. Unfortunately, our alternator assembly, alternator starter motor ignition system pokes out a fair way. Not the end of the world. And the carburetor's hanging down inside the bike, but that's actually quite long because it pokes out both sides of the crankshaft. And by the time you put a gearbox behind it, you'd have a bit of a scene. And the other downside of that arrangement, you can't see it fantastically well, but the exhaust will come out the side, that wouldn't be too bad. But the crankshaft on these things doesn't have a flange to bolt a flywheel to. So you'd have to, there's just a female spline in here, so I have to build a housing to put a final drive sprocket on it. Then it really does get wide. So to keep the engine narrow in the bike, I reckon you'd want to be doing something sort of conventional like that. The only downside of that is that with the carburetors poking out the bottom, or whatever happens down there, all the heavy stuff, all the metal, is very high, which isn't so great for the motorbike, because the crank's a long way up and then everything's above that. So one more option. And here's the engine the other way up. Crankshaft there, cylinders down here, which is upside down compared to how you put it in a car. But it sort of works for me because the heavy stuff's down the bottom, carbies are at the top. You can't use those carburetors because they need to be, gravity needs to be that way, not that way, but 3 downdraft Webers would look pretty good in there. We can keep all this, that fits with the shape of the frame. And at the back, I want to try and use the, well, I need a 90-degree gearbox coming out of the back of the crank to drive the final drive that way, and I think we could be on. And just to finish it off, there's the back of the engine. Final drive comes out there, and the exhaust is right down the bottom and come out underneath the bike and either side of the rear wheel. And it'll look like that from the back. Having run you through the engine, the power head as I call it, we need to move on down the drive line and get the drive out of the back of the engine and turn it 90 degrees to get to the gearbox. And fortunately, an outboard motor also comes with this thing, the bottom part of the leg, which has a 90-degree drive gearbox to turn the propeller. The exhaust comes down there and goes out through the middle of the propeller, but there's a gearbox in here which we'll try and use for our outboard motorbike. So here we have the internals of the gearbox that live in the leg. This shaft comes down from the engine and spins that way, like all good engines. And these 2 bevel gears are in constant mesh. So this one's going that way all the time, that one's going that way all the time. When you want to go forwards with the outboard motor, this dog ring slides across and engages this gear, which drives the shaft that turns the propeller that way. When you want to go backwards, the little gear selector lives in here, pushes the dog ring back the other way, disengages this gear, and this one drives the whole show back the other way, which is that way. What I'm going to do, so if you look at the size of this gear, they're the same, basically the same gear. This one's got this massive great taper roller bearing on it because it not only does 99% of the work, it's also got the thrust from the propeller reacting on it. But I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to use the other one, effectively reverse gear, because it's got a rather, there's the dog that's driven by the shaft, rather more simple mounting arrangement.
So make up a shaft that'll drive that and that. That'll come out the back of the engine, that'll go out the side. And need to make a casing to fit it all in, which would be something I haven't done for a while. Stick with me. Just a further word on the bevel drive. In the outboard motor, this is the shaft that comes down from the engine, and this is the shaft with a propeller on the back end of it. And you'll notice the bevel gear driving the final drive is half the size of that one, almost exactly half. So the propeller's going half the speed of the engine. On the motorbike, I want to gear it up so that this little two-stroke only revs to 6,000, and I want it to do 2,000 RPM at 100 k's, 50 kilometers per hour per 1,000 revs. So in the motorbike, it's going to be this way around, with that shaft. Hello, Mr. Crow. That shaft coming out the back of the engine, driving this shaft with the secondary drive on it. So you get a 2-to-1 gear up. So it'll lope along nicely without having to rev its head off. It just means that at maximum revs, this little shaft's going to be doing 12,000 revs, but with some tapered rollers in oil, I think we'll be okay. We shall see.